difficulty, you will get a recording from this from Daniel. And Daniel, now your screen has disappeared.
All right, it should be back.
Now it is back. And if you start the recording, we will be good to go.
All right, I did indeed start the recording. So that's why it disappeared for a short amount of time. All right, let me just get my screen organized and we will be good to go. All right, so, and also Brian will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat. I probably won't be able to see the chat, but Brian can probably chime up and tell me if something pops up. So today we're gonna be talking about houseplants. And I absolutely love plants in general. I also love houseplants. So I just wanted to share a photo of my house. And as you can see here, just lots of houseplants. And of course, I'm kidding. This isn't actually my house. Although this does, I think we can all agree, this does look like a very, relaxing place to, get home from work, recover from the day, hang out, maybe watch a movie. So definitely, plants can really change the ambiance of our house and make it just a more comfortable place to live. You could also take it to the extreme. I would say this is a house that is indeed a plant. So if you want to do that, I think this would also technically qualify as house plants. But that's a little extreme for the majority of us. So in addition to houseplants just looking really nice and just being something in our house that we enjoy, there are also quite a few things that houseplants have been shown to do for us. So this is a little publication put out by the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture, which, yes, such a thing exists. And you can see, your brain on nature. Indoor plants psychologically link us to nature. They comfort us, they help us breathe. You can see on here, they say each 1% addition of plants in a room results in a 67% decrease in formaldehyde. That is very important. One that really popped out to me is that they stimulate both a psychological and physiological relaxation response. Now, when I read that, I thought that was kind of interesting. So fortunately, they give you the credits, the references for where they pulled that information from. So if you follow that one along, you'll see that some researchers did a study where they took two groups of people. They made them both sit in separate rooms, and they showed one people a plant, and they showed another person an empty box. And you can see here, it's not necessarily important, but they monitored what their brains did. And you can see that the amount of stress here in these people with plants is much lower than those that didn't have a plant. So, that's a pretty interesting study to say that, hey, humans really enjoy being around plants. And maybe if you put plants in your house, you can benefit from them. So let's talk about plants in general. This presentation is maybe going to be a little broader view about plants and houseplants. And then I hope that if you have individual questions, we can kind of delve into those. But I just want to start with kind of a broader overview. So the first thing to know about plants are incredibly adaptable. You can think of the incredible diversity of plants all around the world. Here you can see in this photo in the desert outside, and this is in Arizona. Just looking at that photo, you can see maybe 10 or 15 different types of plants all growing in a really arid environment with no water, which is pretty incredible that you could have such diversity and really plants that are doing very well in a really challenging environment. And then at the same time, you can have plants that exist in a rainforest, which is a completely different environment, and they'll still, doing just perfectly fine. So this comes from plasticity. So plasticity basically just means that the plants are able to change or adapt to their environment. Now we can think of it in the short term. For instance, like if we were say like, okay, this fall season where we have these really hot days and really cool days, a plant is just outdoors, just sitting there, right? And so if it gets really hot, that plant has to change what it's doing in order to survive to make seed the next day. Humans, we would put on a jacket if it was really cold, but the plant just has to be there. So the plant has to, have some amount of adaptations for its environment. So that would be more of a short-term plasticity. Now you can have longer-term plasticity where a plant is able to adapt completely. So you may be wondering why I have this photo. I don't know if anybody recognizes where this is. So this is Machu Picchu in Peru. And the reason why I put that there is if you're in Machu Picchu and you're over here on this side and you're looking back at where the photo was taken from, you can see all of these terraces. I often think of when humans construct, these grand spectacles, move lots of rock and build lots of temples and things like that. I usually think, well, hey, they must have had a pretty great food supply because, if everyone is farming, no one has time to build amazing temples or anything like that. So the Incans were amazing at building all kinds of things, but they're also amazing agriculturalists. So you can see all of these terraces that they built into the hills. And this is a really challenging environment for agriculture. But because of their unique knowledge, they were able to have an incredible food supply. Now, what's cool about these terraces and kind of shows the plasticity of plants or the ability to adapt is the Incans recognize this ability to adapt. And each one of these terraces has a slightly different soil type, and they grew a different variety of a plant. So you can think that they had, hundreds, if not thousands of types of potatoes and corn and all kinds of things growing to very specific environments that they've created on these terrace slopes. Those terraces have been passed down amongst families, between families. And so pretty incredible display of how you can harness that ability for the plants, the ability to adapt to help us and to produce food. So what do we do with all this amazing evolution, this ability for plants to really adapt to their environment? Well, we pluck those plants from their ideal environment and we try to grow them in our houses, which, is very different from where they evolved from. So this is something to think about when we're talking about houseplants is that, where did this plant come from? Where would this plant had adapted for millions of years to grow? And maybe that might be some of the, reason why you're maybe having difficulty growing a plant in your house or something like that. So the basis of all plants is, or maybe not the basis, but they're kind of their foundation, is the soil at which they grow in. Now, soil is incredibly important for farmers out, growing all of our food, but then also for houseplants that we're trying to grow in our home. Now, a lot of houseplants, if you were to look at the soil, you would see something like this. Now, I don't know about y'all, but this doesn't really look like the soil that we have outside. So traditionally, the soil that we have in our houseplants is a very organic material. It's made up of, if you look at it, kind of like wood and bark, and you can see all these little white chunks, usually, which are actually a rock that's been superheated so it explodes. And this, it doesn't really look like the soils that we would grow, say, soybeans in. And so understanding why, the soils are like that, and maybe our plant wouldn't necessarily prefer to be in that media is important when we're thinking about plants. One thing, and I'll talk about this a little later in my presentation, is that, the nursery might use a different type of soil, so it's easier for them to grow the plant. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be easier for you to grow that plant. And I will talk about that in a little bit as well. So actually here's my great slide. So how are you growing the plant versus how it's grown at the nursery? Again, the reason why we do all of this, there's traditionally a lot of this soil is so the water drains out of it really well. And so it doesn't get really soggy and wet, because in the nursery, they can irrigate it, almost every single day. But if you buy a plant, that's grown in a nursery setting and you bring it home, well, maybe the soil would be better if it was a little heavier. So one reason or one thing to think about, I'm going to go back to this quite a few times, is think about how that plant was grown in nature. So if your plant traditionally, explored the soil and had a wide ranging root system, and now we're trying to grow it in a pot, well, you might have to change some things about the soil in order to make that work. So for instance, this was a study looking at, well, how the heck do these desert plants survive? Because, it's amazing. You go out there and there's, no water. It looks like no water. And here you are having plants that are thriving, really. So if you look at this, you can see that like a date palm, for instance, can have roots that go down to 5 meters. Which is quite a few meters. But then I think one thing that's important is you look at this cactus over here and its roots go out, almost, 1 to 2 meters from its base. Now I see this oftentimes, people will say, why did my cacti die? Or don't cacti love the heat? And you think of, well, this cacti, yeah, it loves the heat. It can survive in the heat. But what did we do? We took that cacti and we put it in this little tiny pot and we put it out on our hottest patio and we never watered it. And we wonder why it died. So think about, yes, okay, you can get this cactus to grow in this pot, but maybe you actually have to water it more regularly because it's not adapted to handle the environment that you put in. Another thing to think about is, say, a cactus in this pot here, the sunlight is going to warm up this container quite a bit more than if you imagine a cactus right here in the desert, where its roots are maybe down, 18 inches or something like that in a nice cool environment. So maybe this cactus will actually need much more water than, if that cactus was growing in the desert. So I talked a little bit about what type of soil do plants like. So this is actually a really sad photo, but this is rainforest deforestation and gold mining in the Amazon. But what you can see from this photo is that the soil is very yellow and red. And it's very maybe different looking than the soil that you have in your current houseplants. So a lot of our houseplants come from, kind of tropical rainforests or areas where there's lots of rainfall. Now, when we get millions of years of rainfall in the soil, you end up leaching away a lot of nutrients and kind of acidifying the soil. Also, if you think about it, the mountains that we have here in North Carolina are very different geologically than the mountains in South America or somewhere else where there are where our plants might be coming from. So kind of understanding that, well, yeah, your plant can do all right in that soil media that it came in, but maybe you would prefer something else, or maybe, a more acidic soil would be better for that sort of plant. And I see there's a couple things in the chat. Oh, Brian's on it. Thanks, Brian. So one thing, soil isn't everything, but soil is a great place to start when we think about our plants. So another really important part of our relationship with the plants that we're trying to grow in our house is water. Now, I don't know exactly where this quote came from or where I heard it, but it says your soil will become your water. And what that means, so this is a photo of an irrigation canal in California. And if you can imagine, if you irrigate with water from that canal for years and years and years and years, well, whatever is in your water is just going to end up in your soil. So if you have really high calcium in your water, well, eventually your soil is going to become very calcium. So that's important because, our houseplants never get rained on, nothing ever leaches away. So whatever is in your water, you should be careful of that you're not just kind of slowly, poisoning your plants, particularly if you live in a city that puts chlorine in its water. If you're constantly adding chlorine to your houseplant, well, maybe you'll start to have some toxicity symptoms. So one really helpful thing is you can submit a water sample and they can, if you contact your extension agent or you bring a water sample to Raleigh, to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, they can test your water. I think it's $5. And you can figure out exactly what's in your water. And maybe you should be changing up something you're doing when growing your plant. So a lot of people have questions about how much to water, when to water, things like that. But I would say in general, most people overwater their houseplants. And the reason for this is you can think of your houseplant as, you say you have your houseplant in a container in your home, and you want to take care of it. You're always trying to make it the most happy you possibly can. But it's inside your home. It is not 90 degrees out there. It's probably not in direct sunlight 20 or 12 hours a day, like some outdoor plants would be. And so actually houseplants don't require that much water compared to a plant that's grown outdoors. Now, what makes this tricky is that wilting can be a sign of under or overwatering. So sometimes when you see a plant wilted, it might actually be overwatered and not traditionally where you think, oh, it's wilted because it doesn't have enough water, which, yeah, it's hard that the same sign can indicate two different things. But the best way to tell if your plant is under or overwatered is stick your fingers down in the soil, and you could figure out pretty quickly, how much water, is it really moist? Is it really dry? What's the deal? And also, like I showed in that cactus photo, sometimes the plant has plenty of water, and water is not the issue. Maybe it's too hot. I see this oftentimes. People have a plant on their patio in a black pot, and the black pot is right in the sun. And if you were to pull out the plant, you can see that all the roots on the sun side are completely dead, and all the roots are on the back side of the pot. So they've grown away from the really hot sunlight that's kind of burnt the roots. And so in this case, you might stick your hand down and it feels pretty dang moist. It's not a problem. Excuse me. Seems like I need to drink some water. So you might, feel like it's totally okay. And then you could, that it has plenty of water, but in reality, it's actually too hot. It's not necessarily that it doesn't have enough water. It's just too dang hot down by the roots. So how you determine how much water a plant will need is really, where is it located? If you have a plant that's in, you have these beautiful windows in your house, with, the atrium with the skylights, and it's getting sun all day long, and it's really hot in there, and it's a plant that loves that, well, maybe it's actually going to need quite a bit of water. But on the same token, if you look at, I don't know if you can see, but the plants behind me, they are on a windowsill here, and yeah, they get a decent amount of sunlight and heat, but they probably only get sunlight for 4 or 5 hours a day, direct sunlight. So really, they don't need very much water in comparison to those plants in that atrium that probably need quite a bit of water. So I know this is always hard, but the answer is it depends. But I would just encourage you to kind of think about your plant a little bit more, because there really is no perfect answer for how much to water your plant. So now another really important thing that I get lots of questions about is fertility. And I chose this photo. I guess it's a little scandalous. I don't know. It's from the 1400s, so I don't think you can consider it scandalous. And you can also see that the lady here is covering up Venus, or trying to. But so this is the painting called The Birth of Venus, and Venus is the goddess of fertility. And one thing I think you can see that really stood out to me is, so her symbol is a rose. And so you can see roses coming down off. I don't know what these people's deal is. I think they might be the wind. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not an art scholar. But you can see there's roses, and there's flowers all over this blanket, and her dress is all covered in flowers, and there's trees. So lots of symbols of plants. And you can think, back in that time, people were really connected with the food that they ate, or food production. They were much more tied to seasons. They were much more tied just to agriculture in general. So to me, it's no surprise that, a symbol of that fertility would really be plants and agriculture. And so with that and fertility and food and eating and plants, I have a question for the group. Why do humans eat? Does anybody want to pipe up, or you can either unmute yourself, you can turn on your video, you can message the chat. Does anybody have any thoughts? Why do humans eat? Okay, Savannah says for nutrients. Okay. Lois says to survive. I like that. But what does that mean to survive? Why are we, what are we getting out of the food? Why are we really eating? For energy. There you go. All right, Mary, I like that one. All right, so those are all right. That's perfect. Okay, my ECA lady said to survive. Well, that's excellent. Excellent. So yeah, so the reason why humans eat is that when we take all that food in, we break apart the carbon and we get the energy from that, right? So that's what like keeps us going. But humans also twofold, we get the nutrients from it. So I would say y'all are all right. Everyone gets an A. You're getting nutrients so you can actually build your body, but you're also getting the energy in order to keep moving and run around and, you know, open and close your eyes and watch this presentation. Now, I want to ask another question. What do plants eat? And again, you can chime in on the chat or, you know, anything. Does anybody have any ideas? What do plants eat? Okay, Mary says carbon dioxide. I'll wait until one more person responds. If not, I can just move on. Nutrients, okay, okay. Sunlight, okay. All right, well, that's perfect. Okay, so this is interesting though, right? So we often think of plants as kind of like, you know, they're eating the fertilizer, they're eating things. But plants are amazing. Where they actually get their energy from is from the sunlight, right? So what they eat, or the reason why they eat and get their energy, is through sunlight, through photosynthesis. So they take the energy from the sun, the little photons come down and energize some electrons, and that's what actually gives plants the energy to grow and move. But then where they get their nutrients, how they build themselves, is from carbon dioxide, is really to get their carbon, and then they pull nutrients from the soil. Now, why I want to bring this up and why I think this is really important is a lot of people think of plants kind of like themselves, right? Like we love to anthropomorphize the things around us that, you know, they would interact with the world just like us. But plants are very different. So plants don't need that much fertilizer. They don't need to eat very often because what they really eat is sunlight. And so as long as they're getting sunlight, you know, they're pretty dang good at finding nutrients if they have some soil. Not to say that they never need to be fertilized, but it's far less important than getting really good sunlight. So I want to show you this short little video, and we'll make, so it's only a minute, and she talks about the importance of sunlight. Oh boy, that was close.
Light is the most important thing to evaluate when picking a plant for your space. There are 3 types of light: low light, medium light, bright light. Bright direct light means there's no barrier between the window and the plant. Aloes and pillias thrive here. Bright indirect light means the plant lives next to or below a south-facing window. Monsteras and rubber trees prefer this light. Medium light means you're placing your plant a few feet from the window, or in a window that gets some sun, but not a ton. Ferns and calatheas do well in medium light. Low light means the plant will receive no direct sunlight. Not many plants dig this. ZZ plants or snake plants are your best bet. Just like people, some plants are more high maintenance than others. If you're down to baby your plant on the daily, build that air plant collection. If you want something more resilient that takes less TLC, try succulents or snake plants. If you have pets at home, the safest bet is to buy non-toxic plants like bird's nest ferns, parlor palms, or peperolias. Congratulations, you're now ready to be a plant parent.
All right. So I really liked that video. It was very short, but I thought it, touched on a lot of great things, talking about, where our plants are located and how that influences how much sunlight they get. And you can probably pick up, and this might be part of, why you're taking this class, is plants are, all a little different. They all might like a little something different. So taking the time to kind of understand that is important, because if you take your plant that loves the sunlight and you put it in the shade, well, it's probably not going to be very happy, and vice versa. So with plants and fertility and nutrients, it is possible to have nutrient deficient plants. And plants are fascinating. This is one thing I love. It's one of my favorite things about working with plants, is looking at nutrients and how they utilize nutrients. And you'll see, each nutrient that it can be deficient in will show a little different symptom based on what that nutrient is used for. So you can see nitrogen is really important for photosynthesis, which makes a plant green. And so if it's low in nitrogen, the plant will generally turn pretty yellow. And all kinds of different spectrum. Now, with your houseplant, usually nutrient deficiency is not the problem. What I mostly see is nutrient toxicity. And you can see this is actually a pistachio plant, which I don't think anybody's growing pistachios in their house, but I thought it was a great example. So what you can see with this pistachio, which is incredibly capable of handling salts. So this must be like grown in the ocean or something like that, because pistachio loves salt. They can handle boron and chloride and everything. But what the plant does is it says, oh gosh, I don't like this chloride. And so it shoves it out to the outer part of the leaves, and it kills the outer part of the leaves in the hopes that that part will just fall off and get rid of that toxic element. So the same thing, sometimes you can see this in your houseplants as well. Now, why do I say that nutrient toxicity is far more common in houseplants? Well, I Googled a photo of fertilizing plants, and I came across this image, which is this small little bean plant, and someone, tenderly, lovingly giving it fertilizer. And to someone who's an agronomist and takes care of plants, I was a little amazed by this photo. So I did some math. I wanted to know what the heck are they doing, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt. So I didn't try and roast them too hard. So I did some complex math and came up that they're fertilizing this plant almost 3 times more than it would ever possibly need in its ideal environment. So the thing about our fertilizers that we have and the fertilizers that we buy is they're really concentrated, and they're very effective as what they do. Now, these are agricultural fertilizers, are generally very concentrated. And, all these companies that create fertilizers for houseplants kind of know that people have a tendency to, really want to love up their plants and make sure they're healthy. And so, they really dilute those products down. So, if you buy a little bottle of, liquid fertilizer or something like that, they have already diluted it really low, because they know that people love their plants and they're going to want to, feed their plant and make it really happy. But the problem with a scenario like this, where you're putting this much fertilizer on a small plant, is that fertilizer can also be a salt. So like sodium chloride, which, table salt, what we have, fertilizer can also be a salt and acts just like a salt, where, you think of like if you put a tablespoon of salt in your mouth, that would not be a pleasant experience. Well, imagine that, surrounding a plant's roots as it's trying to get water and trying to get nutrients. So it's important not to over fertilize our plants. So some tips for when you're trying to determine, should I fertilize my plant? What should I do? Think about how much your plant has grown. So if you're growing a plant that it's just producing tons of leaves all the time and it's just going crazy. Well, maybe that plant is going to need a little bit more fertilizer than the tiny little succulent that's put on, one leaf the last 5 years or something like that. Plants that produce a lot of foliage are generally going to need more nutrients than those that produce very little. Again, where is your plant growing? Is it growing in the sun? Is it growing in the shade? Plants grown in the shade, again, are going to, as a product of just not growing a whole lot, they don't need as much fertilizer as those that are growing in the sun. And then also the age of the plant. Is it a really young plant that's just getting started and it's producing lots of roots and really growing out? Or is it a really old plant? Thinking about all these things when we go to fertilizer plants is very important. One other great way that you can fertilize your plant is to change up the soil that the plant is living in. So if you have a plant that's been living in a pot for a really long time, and the roots are kind of, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but the roots have kind of explored everywhere, have used up all the nutrients in that soil. Well, maybe the easiest way to fertilize it would just be to repot it. So take it out of its pot. You don't have to get all the soil off of it, but knock off some of the soil and replace it with some more soil that might have a little bit more nutrients built up in it. Like I said, a lot of the soils that our houseplants come in are very, they're organic matter. They're made up of all kinds of things that over time break down, and kind of like your compost pile, when they break down, they've released the nutrients that's tied up within them. So if you've had a plant in the same soil for a really long time, well, maybe if you change it up, that plant's now going to have access to other nutrients. So let's talk about buying plants. When you go to actually purchase the plant, what should you look for? What should you be doing? Because it's a very exciting time. I don't know about y'all, but when, I go to a nursery or somewhere, there's so many beautiful plants. Mostly the ones I want are way too expensive, but nonetheless, it's just fun to look at them. So the first thing is, let's talk about this photo. So if you look at this photo, what do you notice? Well, you see it's in this beautiful greenhouse, right? And so it's got sunlight all day long. And there's probably some nursery employee just off the screen with a watering can or a watering hose going around and watering everything. And they're, out there all the time trimming and making sure everything's beautiful. And I don't know about y'all, but, that's not really my house. I don't really have that much sunlight. I don't water my plants. It's, all the time, every single day. And so when you take this plant from this environment and you bring it to your house, like I said, plants are incredibly adaptable, but you also don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can, go from one environment and then go to the other one and just be happy. There might be some lag time, or they, might not look so great, or, maybe they just won't do very well. Plants in environments like this with lots of sunshine will put on really waxy coatings on their leaves to protect themselves from all that harsh sunlight. So if you take this beautiful plant right here and you put that in your kind of shady dining room, well, maybe that plant will have a really hard time. So, choosing plants in an environment that's, kind of suited, or they're suited for an environment that you have in your house, trying to not take something and grow somewhere it doesn't want to grow, you're going to have way more success than if you like the look of a plant and you want to make it work in an area. Nature is amazing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just have miracles of growing things where they don't want to grow. Another thing when you buy plants from a nursery is oftentimes they'll be root bound. So root bound plants just mean that plant has been hanging out in that pot for a long time and it's kind of bored. It's just been going in circles for years and years and years, or maybe even just months. It's just cruising around in there. And this can be a problem for a variety of reasons. First, it means that plant is probably pretty unhappy. Again, anthropomorphizing plants. I don't know if plants are happy, but in my mind, I would prefer not to be growing around in circles for years. But what can happen too is those roots, as they're growing around in circles, they can actually start to girdle themselves. So a similar way, if you were to go around and wrap a strap around a tree and leave it for a couple of years, you kill the tree. Same thing can happen with the roots. The roots will all grow around each other and they'll basically just kill themselves. Again, too, this is also bad because that means that the plant can't really get any nutrients. Like if you look at this soil, I mean, there's hardly any soil, right? Those are just all roots. So what is that plant, where's that plant getting its nutrients? Where is it, moving around in? So what I like to do is when I buy a plant from a nursery is when no one's looking, you look around and you pull it out of its pot and look at the roots. Because if you're going to invest in a plant, you sure as heck don't want to get it home and find out that it's just completely mangled. Now that might be something you could maybe pull it out, you look, you realize it's really root bound. Maybe you love root bound plants because you get to put them in big pots and they just get to, live their best life. I mean, I find that very satisfying. So maybe that's something that, you can do, and you could go to the person who owns the nursery and say, hey, I'll buy this plant, but I'm gonna need 50% off because it looks pretty root bound. So that's something, yeah, if that's something you're into, but also it could be really sad if you bring home a plant, you thought it was gonna be growing really well, and then it dies, within a month. That's a major bummer. So yeah, always look at the roots. You always look to see if they have any disease. Oftentimes nurseries will, clip out all the dead leaves so that the plant looks beautiful and really nice and green and very happy. But, look at the plant and see if there's any disease or anything like that. So then one thing about, like I was mentioning, repotting plants is, different container sizes. So it's possible to grow plants in a variety of different container sizes. Again, certain plants want lots of space to roam around. Other plants don't need much, but oftentimes the container can really dictate how big that plant will get. So plants are pretty fascinating. They're always doing a calculation of how much is above the ground versus how much is below the ground. So a plant will never really grow more than the roots it has to support itself. There's a few examples where it doesn't necessarily do that, but it's a good rule of thumb that plants love to have an equilibrium of roots and shoots. So if you're trying to get a really big plant in your front room or something like that, you're going to need a pretty good sized pot. Because then you're going to get lots of roots. The plant is going to have lots of roots and realize, well, heck, I can grow really big because I've got the roots to support it. But this is a great mechanism if you want to have a little smaller, if you want to have one on your dining table or something like that, a smaller plant. You can put it in a smaller pot or keep it in a smaller pot, and that's going to limit how big it's going to get. But again, you kind of have to consider all the considerations we've talked about, soil and water. If it's in a really small pot, but it has kind of a big amount of foliage, well, maybe that pot's going to need to be watered way more than a plant that isn't watered, that is in a bigger pot and you can just water every once in a while. One thing that just came to mind as I was talking about that, I kind of forgot to mention, when you do water plants, usually it's better to water plants less regularly, but with larger amounts of water. And the reason why, and I'll show you an example in just a second, but if you are pouring water just kind of on the surface, you kind of end up soaking just the top couple inches of the soil, and the water doesn't really work down in the lower part of the pot. And plants will grow their roots where the water is. So if you have, lots of water throughout the profile, they're way more likely to be able to utilize that water. So I'm going to show a couple examples, but that's all I have for the PowerPoint presentation. So there's my contact information, and I'll put that in the chat as well. But now I want to show you, let me just pull this up real fast. Okay, so behind me, my little collection of office plants. So I was talking about how our soils will become our water, right? So it might take me a second to focus, but I have a little microscope, and the water that we have here in our office is not great. Let's see, I can't really focus. And I need to get it tested, but you can see this is on the rim of the pot. There's this huge buildup of white crystals of some sort. And I'm not sure exactly what it is. I'm going to need to bring it down or take some water samples and see what it is. But you can see on the ring of the pot, there's all that buildup. So that's a really good indicator that, hey, maybe there's something in my water. And, you know, every time I'm watering it, I'm adding a little bit more calcium carbonate or something, or a little bit more chloride to my plant's pot. And you can imagine this pot, this is a fixed system, right? So nothing ever really leaves. I put water in, the plant uses it or some evaporates, but nothing ever disappears from this pot. So if I'm constantly adding more chlorides, well, eventually you're going to kill your plant because you're just going to have too high of a concentration. One way to get around this, if you're at your house and you take a water sample and you realize that, yeah, you have, you know, too much chloride in your water or something like that, that doesn't mean you need to go buy bottled water every time you water your plant. But maybe you can either take your plant and put it outside during a rainstorm. Sometimes that can help to flush out some of that nutrients. But you can also change the soil. So you can repot your plant and kind of get rid of all that built up chloride in the soil and put fresh soil in. You know, that might not be a long-term solution, but it can, you know, can help if you have a problem. Okay, one other thing I wanted to talk about. I didn't talk very much with insect pests because insect pests are usually very, there's such a wide diversity that it's kind of hard to touch on insect pests in a talk like this. But one common insect pest that a lot of people get is fungus gnats. So fungus gnats, you've probably seen the kind of like, you know, kind of hovering around your potted plants, and they can get really extreme and really annoying. And one thing I found that really helps with fungus gnats is if you put a layer of sand around the top of the plant. And the reason why is fungus gnats are feeding on the decomposing material in your pot. And they interact with that upper layer of the soil. That's where they lay their eggs and feed and move around. And they really don't like beach sand. So if you go to, or if you live on the coast, maybe you live on the coast, you can just go out your front door. But if you go to, you know, any hardware store, you get a bag of play sand for not very much money, and you coat the top of your plant. That usually will take care of fungus gnats. Now, you know, if you don't like the look of it, that can be kind of a bummer. But overall, I find that it works very well. So that's all my show and tell that I have. Does anybody have any questions or have houseplants at their house that they want to show the group?
I can try to show my Monstera. Hold on, I have to turn my background off.
Do you mean you're not, you know, in a farmer's market right now?
I'm not actually, not this time. It's kind of bad lighting. I bought it this size. I can't take credit. I'm just trying to keep it alive at this point.
Nice. Monstera are great plants. I don't know, there's a bunch of different types of Monsteras and they're all beautiful, and they propagate really well. So if you have a friend with a Monstera, you can, you know, go on YouTube, watch a video of how to propagate Monstera and convince them to let you steal one of their cuttings. Oh, Brian's got a houseplant too.
I do. I actually have an office plant. It's my pothos. And sorry for the light, but it's in a full window right here. Starts in this original container here and grows all the way up to the top of these shutters and back down multiple times.
Nice.
So, and I also, talking about houseplants, you may never realize it too, but I actually have just a simple grass growing right here, testing out some different grass seeds that I have grown in a container right here, just to see if I like the texture of it. As another example, you can take non-conventional things and grow them wherever you want them at.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's great. I love it. That's very good. Yeah, don't be limited by what you sell. You can grow any houseplant. I have a, it's funny. Yeah, it turns out we all have plants growing around. I have a, whole container of salad greens that I was growing for a class. Although next to it, I have some salad or some leafy greens that had a disease on them. So that's probably not good for my salad greens. They're probably not going to have fusarium or something. Well, does anybody else have any questions? Curious about anything? Has anybody been to Peru?
Lois asked about propagating a Christmas cactus.
Oh, Christmas cactus. So I just wanted to see, I just want to make sure I'm thinking about the right cactus that you're talking about. Okay. Yes. So I'm not 100% sure on Christmas cactus. I've never personally propagated one, but I'm pretty sure Christmas cactus are the ones that taper down to that little internode, right? Maybe, is that right? Well, okay, so I'll give some general propagation techniques for cacti, and then maybe I can reach out to you, Lois, and help you with Christmas cactus once I look into it a little bit more. But generally, if you're propagating cacti, the most important thing is when you cut the cactus, you want to make sure you use a really clean knife to make sure you're not introducing any disease to that cactus. So usually bleaching a knife really well, make sure it's really nice and clean, and then letting that piece dry out until you form a protective coating or some amount of growth over that area. Now each cactus is a little bit different, but if you take a cactus and you place that kind of like wet wound in some soil, you'll usually end up getting a disease and the plant will usually die. So giving it time to form that layer is really important. And also, if you have a little larger piece, the larger the piece sometimes can be helpful for propagation. I would say it's harder to propagate cacti here in the South. I'm from California where things are really dry. So it's a little easier to propagate because we don't have so much fungus and bacteria floating around, which can complicate propagation. But I would encourage you, if y'all like plants, to try and propagate things. Propagation is amazing. There's so many things you can propagate pretty easily. You can get just a little tiny bottle of plant hormone and just try cutting things, dipping it in that, and see if it grows. Certain things are really easy, and other things are really dang hard. And you'll find out, which ones are the easy ones pretty quick. And there's also lots of resources. You could always reach out to your extension agent, and we can look into it a little bit more detail. There's such a diversity of plants that sometimes it's kind of hard to, unless I've done it personally, I'll have to look it up and try and figure out what's the best protocol to propagate that. In your opinion, what is the easiest houseplant to grow? I've tried air plants and it didn't end well. So I don't know if you caught that in that short little video. Air plants are the hardest thing to grow. So you, Mary, you are great. You did nothing wrong. You have a wonderful green thumb. Don't worry about it. No, air plants are difficult because, and again, so plants are so amazing. They can grow everywhere. They have no problems, but we like to complicate things, right? So we take a cactus that loves growing in the desert and has a great time, and we put it in this little tiny pot where we have to control everything. We have to water it. We are completely in control of its whole existence. And that's really challenging because we don't have the time to just focus. Whereas if that cactus was growing where it wanted to grow, it would just figure things out, right? So with plants, I find that the plants that are easiest to grow, I've got one over here. Your classic snake plant, right? There's a whole mess of them. If you want, I could remove a chunk of that and send it to you, although that's probably illegal. I don't know if I'm allowed to mail plants. They propagate real easy. You can pull them out of the ground, rip them in half, plant them in different pots. They'll just take off. I mean, I moved this one here like not that long ago, and half those are new little fronds sticking up. So I would start with a snake plant. You actually do have a snake. Okay, nice, great. Well, see, hey, you're already a wonderful plant mother. You've already have a snake plant. Monstera can be good. It can be a little bit tricky, a little finicky. Aloe vera, actually, that's the plant next to my snake plant is an aloe vera. You may notice that all the plants I have are easy to grow because I go on vacation and things like that. So I can't be in my office all the time. So aloe vera would be a great one. Also very useful. You can cut yourself or you burn yourself or get a sunburn and you got aloe vera growing in your house. That one can be pretty easy. I would just say, just take a plant, give it a nice size pot. Don't put it in a little tiny pot. And you'll probably have better luck because then, you don't have to remember to water it. Oh, this plant needs water every 2 days. It's in a pot big enough that it can handle that.
And also for the Christmas cactus question, I did plant it and post it about the plant database, shows about one of the 5 varieties that was listed on there. And the second link is actually from Clemson Cooperative Extension. It's called their Thanks and Christmas Cactus. And it also has a section about propagating a Christmas cactus for you in that link provided in the chat box for everybody.
Well, there you go. Oh yeah, it looks like you can just pinch off sections and let them callus. That's awesome. Well, there you go. Thanks, Brian.
Not a problem.
All right. Well, if no one has any other questions, thank you all so much for coming. And if anything comes up, just feel free to email us or you can chat us, you can call us, we're here to serve you. So feel free to reach out. All right. Bye, everybody.